Right now, somewhere in a small kitchen at 11 at night, Stickman is standing alone with his phone still warm in his hand. In about 8 minutes, he is going to sit down on that kitchen floor and finally ask himself one question he has spent 26 years avoiding. A question so simple, most people would assume he already knew the answer. He didn't. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why it took him this long to ask it. But to understand tonight, we have to go back to a Tuesday, 19 years earlier, to the moment this whole story actually began. Welcome back to Smartest Stick, where we break down the mind one story, one step at a time. If you've ever been called the strong one, stay till the end, because tonight's story might explain a part of you that you've never had words for. Stickman was 7 years old on that Tuesday. He remembers it was pasta night because pasta nights were the nights his parents fought the loudest, as if the smell of tomato sauce was some kind of trigger nobody had ever named. He sat at the top of the stairs in his socks, knees pulled to his chest, listening to his mother's voice crack in a way that didn't sound like an adult voice at all. It sounded small. It sounded like his voice. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the silence after. And in that silence, 7-year-old Stickman made a decision that would quietly run his entire life for the next 2 decades. He walked downstairs, sat next to his mother on the kitchen floor, and said the only thing he knew how to say. "I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." She hugged him so tight it hurt and told him he was the strong one. She said it like a gift. He took it like one too. He had no way of knowing it was actually a job he just signed up for, without a contract, without pay, and without an end date. By the time he was 10, Stickman could read a room before he even walked into it. He could tell from the sound of the front door closing whether it was going to be a good night or a night where he needed to get his younger sister into her room, put the cartoons on loud enough to cover the shouting, and sit outside her door like a small, exhausted guard dog. Nobody assigned him this. He just noticed nobody else was doing it, and somebody had to. By 14, he had a whole system. His father's silence meant give him space. His mother's tired eyes meant offer to help with dinner before she asked. His sister's slammed door meant knock softly. Bring her a snack, a joke, anything that said I noticed you without making her explain why she was upset. He was 14, running an entire household's emotional weather report, and not one person had ever asked if that job was too heavy for him. Here's the part most people don't expect. Stickman wasn't miserable. He was good at this. Teachers loved him. Adults called him mature for his age, an old soul. Every compliment felt like sunlight on his skin. He didn't know yet that he was being praised for a wound that hadn't finished forming. Fast forward to now. Stickman is 26. Good job. Friends who like him. A life that looks completely fine from the outside. But something strange keeps happening, and he's never been able to name it. His girlfriend asked him once, gently, why he never tells her when something's wrong. He genuinely didn't have an answer. The honest one was buried so deep he'd forgotten it was there. Somewhere inside him is still a 7-year-old on a staircase who learned that his pain was an inconvenience, and that the safest thing he could ever do was carry it alone. At work, he's the one everyone leans on, the one who stays late fixing problems that aren't his, the one coworkers vent to because he's such a good listener, so calm, so steady. Nobody knows that afterwards, Stickman sits in his car in the driveway for 10 extra minutes and just breathes, because he has nowhere left to put what he just absorbed from everyone else. He keeps noticing a pattern he can't shake. He's drawn, again and again, to people who need saving. It isn't romantic instinct, it's a much older instinct. Being needed feels like being loved, because for Stickman, those two things fused together on a kitchen floor when he was 7, and nobody ever came along to separate them again. He remembers a friend from college, someone who called him at 2 in the morning more often than anyone should, always mid-crisis, always needing to talk it through. Stickman never once said no. He'd stay on the phone for hours, calm and steady, the same way he used to sit outside his sister's door. It never occurred to him to ask why he kept ending up in that role, or why the friendships that felt easiest were the ones where someone else needed fixing. He just assumed that was what being a good friend looked like. Nobody had ever taught him there was another way to be loved. Maybe your version of this story looked different. Not fighting parents, maybe a sick sibling, a parent working 3 jobs, a divorce that split one household's weight across 2 smaller ones. The details change, the role doesn't. Someone has to hold it together, and a child quietly raises their hand without even realizing that's what they're doing. Which brings us back to tonight. 11 o'clock, the kitchen. The phone still warm in his hand. His sister, the one he used to guard behind a bedroom door with cartoons turned up loud, had just called him in tears. Adult tears now, about an adult problem. And Stickman, on autopilot, shifted straight into the role. Calm voice, solutions, reassurance. He hung up after 20 minutes of holding her together and something in his chest just gave out. He sat down on the kitchen floor, the exact same posture as that 7-year-old, 19 years earlier, on a Tuesday that smelled like pasta sauce. And for the first time in almost 2 decades, he let himself ask the question we told you about at the very beginning. When was the last time someone took care of me? He sat with it and realized he didn't have an answer. Not because it never happened, but because he had spent so long taking care of everyone else that he'd stopped keeping track of anyone taking care of him. He cried in a way he didn't recognize, ugly and overdue, 19 years of a feeling that had nowhere to go until right now. And somewhere in the middle of that breakdown, something shifted. Not fixed, not healed in one night, but shifted for the first time. This is what psychologists call parentification, when a child takes on the emotional role of an adult far too early. It doesn't look like abuse from the outside. It looks like maturity. It gets rewarded, praised, called responsibility. But underneath it, a child learns lessons no child should have to learn. That needing help makes you a burden. That rest has to be earned. That your value is tied to how useful you are to everyone around you. If you recognized any part of Stickman in yourself, you already know this was never really a story about a stick figure on a screen. What actually helps is smaller than people expect. It starts with letting one person see the parts of you that you usually manage alone. It starts with noticing the guilt that shows up the second you rest, and reminding yourself that guilt is an old alarm, not a current truth. It starts with grieving the child who never got the same softness he gave to everyone else, not to stay there, but so you can finally put it down. It also means learning a skill most strong ones never got to practice, the skill of receiving. Letting someone cook for you without immediately offering to clean up. Letting someone ask how your day was and actually sitting in the answer, instead of rushing to ask about theirs. Small moments. But for someone wired to give first, they can feel almost unbearably vulnerable, and that discomfort is exactly the sign that something is finally healing. Stickman didn't stop being strong, he just stopped being strong alone. If this story hit close to home, tell us in the comments how old you were when you first became the strong one. Sometimes saying it out loud, even to strangers on the internet, is the first step towards setting it down. And if you want more stories like Stickman's, subscribe to Smartest Stick, because we're just getting started.